Age of Empires 3, the cheat code that would get you that car and like unlimited money and the rocket, 50 different Catan maps. And there were all these different types of maps and like these different builds, and like there was the all forest map. We dated for 4 weeks. And at the 4-week mark, we got engaged. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And in light of me going full-time with YouTube, I decided to do a series of a few videos. I'm guessing 3 to 4, we'll see. But a series of a few videos going through me. Going through everything, my history, my backstory, growing up, what I did, anything from my entire childhood to early years of marriage, to every job, career, everything I've ever really had in that sense, all the way up to board games, YouTube, all the stuff. And this is 100% inspired by the Dice Tower doing their own, Tom doing a video series of talking about his history in board games and all of that. Make no mistake, I am not the Dice Tower, I am not Tom Vassell, but I found that very captivating to watch, and as a fan of the Dice Tower, I enjoyed watching through literally 4 hours of video history. This will probably not be 4 hours, I have less history to go through. But that's a big part of the inspiration. The timing is me going full-time in YouTube content creation, and the inspiration is the Dice Tower's history of the Dice Tower. This, like I said already, will be a series of a few videos, I'm guessing 3 to 4, and maybe 2-3 years from now there'll be part 5, or whatever numbers there are, and I don't have an exact spacing of how often, how frequent. Maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every week and a half until I'm done. I don't really know. But let's go ahead and dive into this. This is going to start with, well, me growing up. I grew up in Toronto, and I am, for the record, across this entire series, I will be light on other people's information that is not necessarily mine to share. You know, just not heavily going to go into various, interactions with my siblings or all those different aspects growing up, or of co-workers or bosses, or any number of different things. This is going to be light on other people's information. But, and time-stamped, of course. I grew up in Toronto. I was born in 1988, which I guess tells you how old I am. And I grew up as one of 6 children. 5 brothers, 1 older sister, 2 parents, as you might imagine. And I grew up religious, for those who hadn't noticed. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, for those who missed that connection. And I had a fairly typical childhood. No major highlights from like pre-10 years old. I'm sure things happened, but they're not really strong in my memory banks as far as the different things that have and haven't happened before I was 10. I have select memories here and there. Things like going to camp, because that stands out more than school. I remember specific teachers I had growing up. I remember a specific Mr. DeFranco, who was a English teacher, if I recall correctly, but I really enjoyed his classes for some reason. There's just random things that are sticking out as I just choose to talk. I have like certain notes I want to hit, but like the rest is just going to be whatever comes to mind. I remember riding my bike up and down my block every summer. For some reason, again, that's something that stuck out. Like I didn't really go on bike rides around trails or around the city. I would just go up and down, up and down, up and down my block. I don't know why this is sticking out now, but it is. My family and I were big into video games. And we're starting already to fast forward directly, by the way, to teenage years. Again, everything pre-10 is really not something that's strong in my memory. So we're really starting to talk already ages 12 to 17, 11 to 17, somewhere in this gap, as all these small little things congeal into a single, just points of memory in my mind. I remember we played a lot of video games. I don't know if any of you remember, what's his name? Kyle Katarn, is that his name? Kyle Katarn from the Star Wars, like Knights of the Old Republic, one of those video game series. They were so much fun to like have these giant lightsaber battles as you just jumped and slashed your lightsaber. Played a lot of Call of Duty. Those are like different video games. My siblings and I were all very heavily into video games growing up. PC, by the way, all PC. We never really had a lot of stuff as far as anything else. It was just PC based. We grew up with a lot of things from Hocus Pocus to, I don't know, what's that cave digging game where you on DOS? Do you remember playing DOS at all? I remember playing Microsoft's Fury, the like aircraft, not really an aircraft simulator, but like a fighting battle. I try to mimic the sound. I can't do the sound, but playing certain video games really sticks out in my memory. Again, Hocus Pocus, Fury. There was the monster one There was like the Monster Mash game. I don't know if you ever played that one. There's so many things that we played growing up. Missed. Video games were always a big part of my childhood. Age of Empires 3, the cheat code that would get you that car and like unlimited money and the rockets. So many different memories all just blurring together at this point, just as I talk. Again, this is ages 11 to 17 or so. See, growing up I went to, school in Toronto, and then when it came time to go to high school, again, this is partially a bit of an Orthodox thing, I mean, not exclusively Orthodox thing, but an Orthodox Jewish thing. It's very frequent, not necessarily the majority, but it's frequent for a lot of children, a lot of kids to go out of town for high school. It's called yeshivas, but they go out of town for our high school experience, and you go somewhere else, and in my case, I went to Cleveland. This would be age 13, by the way. Age 13, although I should really backtrack a bit, because backing track before we go to the going to high school out of town in Cleveland and all that, and if you're like, don't you live in Cleveland now? The answer is yes, and now you know why. Or at least partially why. But I was always the lemonade stand kid. Like, I don't remember what age it started. I remember in 4th grade, though. 4th grade, I want to say, is my earliest memory. It's possible it was earlier. But 4th grade is my earliest memory of executing on that lemonade stand kid mentality. Of always buying something to resell it. I don't remember if I ever actually had a lemonade stand, but I had many lemonade stand-like experiences. I used to buy sodas and go to whatever hockey experiences or things my friends were playing, and I'd have a backpack full of cold sodas and sell those for a little more than I had paid for them. I used to buy Hershey's Nuggets, gumballs, a variety of other things, and in 4th grade I'd have a backpack of a little store available for sale, like, buy a bag of Hershey's Nuggets for $3, sell them for 25 cents a piece, and get $5 back. I used to buy giant gumballs in bulk and sell those for 10 cents a piece. It took a while, but if I did it right, you could make $20 in a bag, and that $20 in the 4th grade is a lot of money. I remember at one point I tried running this thing where I'd go neighbor store to store in the neighborhood and try to sell advertising pamphlets. I'll put together a flyer and sell that. That never really happened, but I tried different things like that for years. I always had that mentality of running the lemonade stand, whether or not I actually did run a lemonade stand. Again, I don't actually remember ever running a lemonade stand, which is why I'm saying it that way. And so in 4th grade I did that. And doing the summers, I want to say in 8th grade, maybe, I think. 8th grade might have been the first time I was a counselor for a summer camp. Did that for a bit. And then I started running a canteen in summer camp as well. I went out of town, but I came back, and every year I would run a canteen, basically selling stuff, running the food supplies, so to speak, for summer camps and making money that way. But everybody started to be a bit older. We're kind of jumping into high school, going to jump back in a second. But jumping into high school, whenever I'd return for the summer, I'd run the canteens at these camps, and I'd go to various wholesale stores experiences and buy a whole bunch of things, anything from candy bars, chocolate. I had arrangements with the local pizza shops, but I very much leaned heavily into that aspect of myself. And a big part of this, I think, and I don't know what age this started, but a big part of this is my mother always gave me books on investments. She always brought me these things, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or a million other things I don't remember at this time. But I used to read books on how to get started on DRIPs, dividend reinvestment plans. And I remember doing this as a kid. I don't remember exactly what age, but I remember heavily reading all these things on how to put aside money, how to save, how to retire, all those different conversations. And they're long-term game plans, and they weren't things I had money for at the time, but it was something that very much became baked into me. This whole financial side of who I am. And I think this is relevant. I'm really spending a lot of time on this because, again, if you watch my channel now, you know that a big part of my channel focus has been that aspect of the buy and sell of, will this hold its value, will it not, when I talk about Kickstarters. And there's a reason for this. And that I don't know exactly at what point it started, but I always had this background to who I was, this financial side. I don't know if my mother got me the books and that got me started. I don't know if I was into, running these lemonade stands and that made me more interested in the books. I don't know exactly where it started, but I always had that aspect of me when I was a kid. In 5th grade, towards the end of 5th grade, and this is very firmly locked into my memory, but towards the end of 5th grade, I started to have social issues. And the specifics, let's get very hardcore and specific in this one. I don't remember exactly how this like went from me being a completely normal kid with no real issues, not the most popular kid, but also no issues, going to like heavily just starting to drift strongly into social outcast towards 6th grade, 7th grade, drop less but still present in 8th grade, and trying to like dig myself out of a rut that I had built for myself. And that's because in 5th grade, and this is very strongly entrenched in my memory, but in 5th grade, a very popular kid called me a girl, and I made a big deal of it at the time. I just remember like I turned it into such an issue. And if you have kids, if you remember being a kid, kids can be stupid and kids can be cruel, and I made myself a target. Like I really took a single incident, doubled down on it, tripled down on it, and made myself a target. I'm not saying anyone should have actually picked on me just because I made myself a target, but I reacted poorly. I made it entertaining for the other children, the other kids to double down and turn it into a thing. And then that made me make myself more of a target. And again, I don't know why this started in 5th grade necessarily, but it just started to become a thing. And then it kind of didn't stop. 6th grade, I'm not like, I had friends along the way. I didn't have like a horrible childhood, but like 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade all continued this aspect of me going from being a completely normal, neither popular nor unpopular kid to being a kid who was picked on a bit. And that really helped, especially when I was choosing what to do next. That helped heavily in my interest in going out of town, my interest in leaving town and pursuing the subset of my, friends or classmates or whatever it was, of going to an out-of-town school because I wanted a fresh start. Because I realized, by the way, I had realized, probably somewhere in 7th grade already, that it was mostly my own doing. Other people had started it, but I had reacted poorly. I had made it easy for others to pick on me, and I realized I had to like change the way I dealt with these things. And so the problem is that at a certain point things get locked in. It gets harder to dig yourself out of a rut. And so I wanted a fresh start. I wanted to go elsewhere, and my mother didn't want me to go very far. Now Cleveland is fairly close to Toronto. My options were fairly limited. It was like Montreal, it was Cleveland, a few other, Detroit, a few other like local communities that are within a fairly close driving distance to Toronto. My mother chose Cleveland. Well, not my mother chose Cleveland, though we narrowed it down and I chose Cleveland, but it was partially based on a few factors, but including the distance, including the fact that my mother had friends there, various factors like that. And so I went around and I went to Cleveland and I got started, and that was 9th grade for me. 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. I was in Cleveland for those 4 years, through the whole high school experience. 9th grade was good. It was still walking in with like these habits I had to kind of unlearn and these behavioral aspects. 9th grade was good, but I didn't actually like the school I was in 9th grade, and so I switched to a different school in 10th grade. And that was where things really turned around for me, from a social stance. Really turned around for me in 10th grade, and just became one of the guys again, as opposed to lower on the ridiculous food chain that is high school, middle school, all those things. Now this is still doing the part where I was returning to Toronto, going to camp, running canteens in the summer, constantly dealing with that aspect of things. I remember I'd come home for the summer and like alternate between running a camp and then spending all day playing video games, whatever video games there were. We were heavily into Call of Duty around this time. Oh my gosh, Guild Wars. I've talked about Guild Wars before on the channel, but we heavily were into Guild Wars this entire time. Like, this was a big part of our lives in high school. Like, the exploration, the deep dive into the MMORPG that was the original Guild Wars. Not Guild Wars 2, the original Guild Wars 2. I have no interest in Guild Wars 2. And somewhere in these years, I don't remember exactly where, but I want to say maybe 10th, I'm not certain exactly what it was, maybe 10th, maybe 11th grade, I also got into Magic the Gathering. Heavily into Magic the Gathering. And really, really enjoyed playing MTG. Again, I don't know exactly when, but it was along the lines of the Guild Wars, by the way. The same aspects that drive me towards MTG also pulled me towards Magic the Gathering. They both have that aspect of building a build, something to take down others that's not based purely on here's a card, play a card, or tap that spell. It's based on how can I build something cohesive that works together as an entity to really, just deliver a solid build, a solid deck, a solid whatever, in whatever genre you're going with. Also, by the way, Bioshock is fantastic. Just while we're on the subject of video games and things I experienced, Bioshock's one of the best video games I've ever played. But anyways, so, Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering was something that... What year was it? Was it after? I might have to skip a second. I have to come back to MTG. I got into MTG. Let's come back to MTG in a minute, because I think timeline-wise, I'm missing a step. So, after 12th grade, I went to Israel for a year. Israel's, again, the concept of an Orthodox Jewish, kid going to Israel to study for a year or two is fairly common in my circles. I went to Israel for a year to study there. I went to school there, and I enjoyed myself. I studied. I did the whole, Talmud and all these different aspects. But I still wanted to go to university and get started on something else. And so when I came back from Israel, and by the way, in Israel, I played a lot of Catan. I played a lot of Axis and Allies. Not a lot of Axis and Allies, that's true. I played a little bit of Axis and Allies and a lot of Catan when I was in Israel. Catan is something that I had also played online, by the way. There was a site, I don't know if it still exists, but there was a site where you could play these. It's basically Catan. It was called something else, and they had like 50 different Catan maps. And there were all these different types of maps and like these different builds. And like there was the all-forest map and then all these island things. It was basically the same basic engine of Catan, but with a lot of maps around it. I used to play a ton of Catan online. I don't remember exactly when I got introduced to it. It might have been in Israel, but I think it was before that. But whenever it was, we loved it. Like, I absolutely loved it, adored it, would play it as much as possible on these online sites. It might have been post-Israel, because I remember my friend who introduced it to me. So, but yeah, I came back from Israel. At this point, what am I, 16? No, that sounds wrong. 17? Maybe I'm 17? That might be right. No, 3 years, 20, I'm 19. I'm 18 or 19, that's where I am. And I come back from Israel, and I'm into MTG, and I'm playing Magic the Gathering. I'm enjoying Magic the Gathering. Also, by the way, completely skipped the part where I'm into Warhammer as well. Got into Warhammer with my brother got us into Warhammer. And also, we played Game of Thrones growing up as well. The Game of Thrones, the original board game. My brother liked the book and brought home the board game at one point. But he was heavily into Warhammer, and we started building out our Warhammer armies. That was a big part of our lives as well. All these different sub-aspects of just these hobbies and things I was into and invested. I haven't even talked about books or movies. We always read books. We generally liked movies. But Magic the Gathering, coming back from Israel, and I was getting more and more into MTG. And I started buying collections online for myself, to build my own collection. I'd buy these older collections online, and then I'd turn around and start selling some of the cards, online as well. Like, oh, I don't need these cards for this deck, so I'll sell this. And I very quickly realized that this was a thing people did. Some people did it on the side, some people turned it into businesses, and I decided I wanted to turn it into a business. And so I started buying collections on eBay. I started buying various larger collections of MTG, older collections on eBay, trying to price them out as much as I possibly could and make a determination, oh, this guy's selling it for $500, I think if I piecemeal it out, I can get $780, whatever it was, trying to make those determinations. And I started a MTG store. Partially, while I'm still interested in the hobby, I'm still enjoying the hobby, but I started selling MTG online. Called it hbavatar.com. Don't ask me why. Longer background to the name. It's a terrible name for a store, but I wasn't really a smart kid back then. I was just a kid trying to do something. And I started selling this stuff. I sold it online primarily, but again, hbavatar.com or hbavatar.ca. It might have been .ca. Can't remember. And I started growing it as much as I possibly could. By growing it as much as I possibly could, I mean everything was in, I don't know, a dozen large card boxes under my bed, living in my parents' house. And eventually I got to the point where I started making trips to the US every quarter to pick up like 2 or 3 cases of the newest MTG release. I'd go visit Cleveland. I had friends in Cleveland. I had built a community there. It wasn't just about the high school. I had built a lot of friends and families. I was always happy for the excuse to visit. And so I'd have a bunch of boxes shipped to the US, drop in, come back with a few cases of booster packs, spend the next few days watching movies while just unboxing, sorting, putting the commons, the uncommons, the rares, the mythics. Planeswalkers were introduced around this time. Like, I got into MTG, I believe, around the Lorwyn cycle. I believe, I could be mistaken, it might have been earlier. But I started doing this whole online store. And at a certain point, in 2008, I want to say this was, I even was looking into potentially moving to the US, leaving home, going to the US and running the business there. Because the practical reality is running the business from Canada meant that most of my audience was Canadian. For the most part, a US customer would have to be fighting higher shipping fees for it to be worthwhile, which meant I didn't have a lot of US business. I had primarily Canadian business and a small subsection of US business, and I felt that I could really grow the store if I was in the US. And as trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life at this point. I was in university. I was in university for business and society. This is after a brief stint of being certain that I would go to school to be a lawyer. But when it came time to make a decision, I was like, I'm going to go into school to be business. That's what I've been doing my whole life. And I was looking heavily into moving to Cleveland, back to Cleveland, because I had friends there, and running a Magic the Gathering store for the next who knows how long. My mother was not a huge fan of this concept. My MTG store was not making that much money. I was making some money, but I was also slaving away to do it. I remember at one point I did a termination. I ran the MTG store for around 2 years total before I closed it up, but I did a termination at one point, and I was basically making like $4.50 an hour. Basically, I was making money, but I was undervaluing my time heavily, which is a very classic thing that most entrepreneurs do. When they start something up, they just slave away and slave away and slave away. This is true in any industry, especially hobbyist industries, where people are invested because they love the thing they're doing. Talk to any number of indie board game creators and you'll find that smaller companies are often slaving away to make a minimum living wage. But I was making like $5 an hour. But again, it was fine. I just convinced myself, hey, you know, if I move to the US and if I really grow this, if I'm doing X now, I can do X times 5 in the US, which maybe would have happened. No one's really to say. But I do remember my mother had me sit down with a financial friend of hers who knew the markets, and this was before the collapse happened, the 2008 housing collapse and all that. But he basically told me at the time, he said, things are headed towards a recession right now. And at the time, it seemed so bizarre to me, like, what do you mean you're heading to a recession? This is before the warning signs were there. But he knew, and he knew, like, the stuff. People who are in the financial industries can always see these things coming first because they know. The heads up they have is different, but he warned me that things were happening, and he warned me that, hey, when collapses happen, when recessions happen, the thing that tends to get hit first is luxury spending. Magic the Gathering is going to be a luxury thing at the end of the day. I'm not saying what you will or won't do, I'm just saying that we'll take a hit, comparatively speaking. I don't remember exactly what happened there. I remember he talked me out of the moving to the US. He talked me out of jumping off that ledge. And I remember at one point I eventually closed up shop. I don't remember why. I don't remember what. I don't remember the details. I just remember at a certain point I decided it wasn't worth it and it was a distraction from what I was focusing on, and so I closed up the whole MTG thing. So I continued my school. I know this is kind of like abrupt, and I don't remember the end strongly, honestly. I just remember that I kept doing it for a few years and eventually decided it wasn't worth the time anymore and stopped doing it. I was still in school. My school was 3 years, I believe. I believe I was in York University in Toronto for 3 years. Business and society, enjoying my classes, doing all that. And in the last year of school, I started dating. Now this is shidduch dating for context. Shidduch dating is a term you likely haven't heard before, and most of you haven't heard before. There's always like that select few people who are like, you know, Orthodox Jews watch my stuff who are like, I know what he's talking about. And then there's friends of Orthodox Jews who are like, I know what he's talking about. But like, you either heard of the stuff or you haven't. But shidduch dating is, for all practical purposes, it's matchmaker to matchmaker to make me a match. Find me a find, catch me a catch. I've also never watched that, by the way, so if I got those words wrong, so sue me. But matchmakers. Shidduch dating is the concept of finding a matchmaker who sets you up, who sits down with you. They sit down with you and they say, hey, what are you looking for in life? Who do you want to marry? This isn't some, like, you know, just, it's almost the equivalent of dating websites to a degree, but with a heavy focus on your goal is to sit there and to get married, and your goal is to find someone who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And to that end, the most important thing, before you do anything else, is ensuring that you are compatible in your values, in what you want to do in life, and where you want to live, and different things like that. Things that are completely and totally unromantic. But the viewpoint is that you focus on getting the unromantic stuff aligned first, and then you start meeting people within those brackets that you've kind of created and see if you find the person who you get that romantic spark with. You still want the romantic spark. This isn't like, hey, you meet someone and, hey, congratulations, here, these two people, you're going to get married in 2 months. It's not. The goal is to have that interest and compatibility and love and all those factors, but to have it based on a premise of, hey, we want the same things, now let's see if we love each other. As opposed to, hey, we found each other and we love each other, but it turns out you want kids and I don't. Those things are problems. And so we try to get all that stuff out of the way first by going through a heavily vetted process of, we are both interested in getting married, both these people are interested in getting married, we both want kids, we both want to live in wherever, this person is willing to move, that person is not willing to move, that person is doing X, that person is doing Y, these people, you know, all the different things you might care about or not care about. It's basically an interview. It's a job interview. It's the most important job interview of your life when you think about it. And so I did all that, and then I proceeded to continue with my schooling and also occasionally date. You know, you get a call from the matchmaker, you get a call like, oh, I have the perfect girl for you, this, that, whatever, and then you determine if you're interested or not, you call references, you do all this thing. Again, very unromantic sounding. And it is unromantic, but the net result is you then meet someone who you're aligned with, and you either continue to see that person or you don't. You know, hey, we didn't really like each other, call it a day, there's no connection, no spark, there's a little bit of connection, let's go out again and see if there's more of a connection, or hey, we really hit it off, I really like this person, let's continue to date and see if we want to get married. And so I dated for a year. In that year, I dated 13 different women, and a few of them connected with more than others, but for the most part, with the exception of my wife, who eventually married, I obviously didn't marry them, because, you know, that would be a different story entirely. But the 13th girl, and I know 13 is an unlucky number, obviously not in my case, the 13th woman was Rina. Rina, who you've probably seen on the channel in some sense or another, in some videos. She's not always here, depending on what videos you've watched. You may have never seen her, but she's in enough videos that you probably know who she is. But I met Rina in 2010. She was from Cleveland. I had the whole concept of out-of-town dating is a big thing as well. Like, you know, are you dating out of town? And if you are, someone has to be willing to move, right? That's inherent. If I date a girl from LA, one of us has to be willing to move to the other's location, because we're not going to live in two different cities when we get married. So that's always a balance as well. And Cleveland was always a place that I was comfortable moving to. And that made it very easy for me to say, hey, I'm always willing to date people in Cleveland. Because we can figure it out later. Either I move there, she moves here, we'll figure that part out later, but at least I know walking in that it's a conversation I'm willing to have. And I like a lot of people in Cleveland. I had a lot of friends there. And so I had specifically reached out to a matchmaker in Cleveland to try to say, hey, at one point, hey, like, I'm happy to date people in Cleveland if you have any names for me. And she suggested Rina. And we met. I actually said no, by the way, for context. I said no because based on calling references, you know, the people who are like your job references, but they had, based on those calls, I had gotten a very different impression of who my wife is, or was. And I had said no based on that, and the matchmaker really did not take no for an answer, and she really pushed me, incentivized me to call other people. I did. Still wasn't interested. I still said no. A month later, I was visiting Cleveland, and I was like, I'm visiting anyway. I'll see if she's still available. If she is, I'll go out with her. I was very uninterested. I was like checking off a box. But I met her. Obviously, you know the ending of the story. That's the inherent nature of me talking about this. And we hit it off. Very strongly. We had a great time. I was in town for a few days. We went out a few times. We figured out the details to go out again and again. And this is the part that will really throw some of you for a loop in case you aren't used to this concept of dating. But we dated for 4 weeks. And at the 4-week mark, we got engaged. To be more fair, at the 2-week mark, we agreed to get engaged, but we said we'll give it another 2 weeks just to not be crazy. And you're like, that's not being crazy? This is by the way, for context, within my circles, 4 weeks is a little fast. There are those who do it faster, there are those who do it slower. 4 weeks would be a little fast. In my circles, dating for like 2 to 3 months would be completely normal. 4 weeks is like, oh, you guys were like, you know, faster than normal, whatever, it is what it is. It's not like in any way unusual, no one's blinking their eyes, it's just like slightly faster than normal. Now, we got engaged for around 3 months. And again, this is relative. We live in a world now where people get engaged for years, for indefinite 10-year engagements happened all the time. And we got engaged for 3 months, and that's primarily a practical aspect. It just takes 3 months to plan a wedding, unless you're really putting the pedal to the metal. And so we were dated for 4 weeks, dated for 2 weeks, decided to get engaged, dated for another 2 weeks just to not be crazy. Then at the 4-week mark, got engaged and dated for 3 months, engaged for 3 months, had the wedding. And at that point in our plans or whatnot, she was in middle of school in Cleveland. She was in school actively at the time. I was perfectly timing the wedding with graduation. So I was just graduating. I got my degree, I wasn't leaving a job, I wasn't leaving work, and that made it very easy for us to collectively agree, hey, you know what, we'll see what happens, maybe we'll come back to Toronto at a certain point, maybe we'll live here, but for right now, we're going to start off in Cleveland. And so in 2010, I got married, I graduated, and I moved to Cleveland. And that's where we'll end part 1, at least for now. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. There'll be a few more of these as I go through the next several phases of my life. Hopefully these are interesting. I don't really know. I know I find it interesting watching other people's stories, but who's to really say? But in any case, and until next time, have a good one.